Hi everyone, welcome to Sunny Day Discussions. I am Sunny Day. So there are several things I want to get to today. The first one takes place in Bryan, Ohio. Pastor Chris Avell was arrested and charged with 18 criminal charges. The reason was he opened his church, Dad's Place, to unhoused people, providing them with a reprieve from the intense cold due to the polar vortex. It was alleged that the rented church building was violating the zoning ordinance, lacking proper kitchen and laundry facilities, and had unsafe exits and lacked proper ventilation. The church filed a federal lawsuit. The attorney for the church and Avell, Jeremy Dice, D-Y-S, Dice, claims that he thinks the city leaders don't want the ministry in the middle of town, claiming that nothing satisfies the city, and even worse, they embark on a smear campaign of innuendo and half-truths. The federal judge and lawyers for both sides agreed to maintain the status quo, meaning the church is open for religious services until March 4th-ish, when the judge will consider a request for an injunction against the city. The city denies any allegations that it has treated any religious institution inappropriately. The lawsuit stated that its leaders decided in March to remain open at all hours as a temporary emergency shelter for people with nowhere to go and no one to care for them. The church claims that 8 people stay there on a typical night, and a few more in bad weather. Pastor Avell claimed it was the city police officers who would bring people by. Hospitals and homeless shelters would call and see if they could take in some people. The church's policy had been to let anyone stay overnight unless someone poses a danger to themselves or others. 2 volunteers stay there. One acts as a security guard, the other acts as kind of to tone down any conflict, a peacemaker. The city claims that the police calls to investigate inappropriate activities increased in May. Some examples given were criminal mischief, trespassing, theft, and disturbing the peace. The irony is that the church is located next to a homeless shelter. So what is causing the alleged increase in all of these things? Who knows? Or if there even is an increase and they just want this all gone. The lawyer for the church claims that the city is creating problems in order to gin up opposition to the church existing in the town square. The church claims violations of constitutional rights to free exercise of religion and wants protections against government hostility to religion. So we finally have a Christian who is actually behaving in a Christian-like manner, but is getting shut down by government officials. All right, so let's go to a New York Times article. It's about an NYPD officer. So in August 2023, an NYPD sergeant threw a cooler at a Bronx man, hitting him in the head, knocking him off of his motorbike, and killing him. He was arrested and charged with manslaughter, assault, and criminally negligent homicide. Sergeant Eric Duran, 36, was suspended without pay days after the incident. The Office of the Attorney General, Letitia James, began investigating the encounter shortly after the death of Eric Dupri. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. The sergeant was arraigned in Bronx criminal court, where he pleaded not guilty. But amazingly, he had bail. He made the bail and is out, but the bail was set at $150,000. The police alleged that they were conducting a buy and bust operation to catch unsuspecting drug dealers. And they say he was fleeing officers who were trying to arrest him. Mr. Dupri's death was ruled a homicide, and the New York City Mayor, Eric Adams, lots of Erics in this one, he is a former police captain, says that that's not a policy we use, throwing a cooler. In the days following Mr. Dupri's death, his family disputed the officer's account. Dupri's brother, who was there, said that they were just on the sidewalk chilling and smoking when a group of officers approached Mr. Dupri as he sat on a borrowed motorized bicycle. Because the bike was not registered, Dupri was afraid that the officers would confiscate it, so he started the bike and left. As he tried to evade the police, he drove onto the sidewalk, and the sergeant picked up a cooler and smashed it into Dupri's head. The street was nearly empty. There was no danger of pedestrians, and Mr. Dupri was unarmed. So there's a lot of people that are saying, well, he was a criminal, he was a drug dealer. That's irrelevant. That is 100% irrelevant. He may be the worst person in the world, but he deserves the right to go to trial, not to be executed. Speaking of execution, in Alabama, on Thursday, Alabama executed a man with nitrogen gas, a first of its kind execution. The state said the method would be humane, but critics called it cruel and experimental. The execution took 22 minutes. Kenneth Smith appeared to remain conscious for several minutes. For at least 2 minutes, he appeared to convulse and writhe on the gurney, sometimes pulling against the restraints. This was followed by several minutes of heavy breathing until the breathing was no longer present. The United Nations, has said that that execution by nitrogen gas would amount to torture. The American Veterinary Medical Association recommends giving even large animals a sedative prior to using this method of execution. The death penalty experts have deemed that this method is unfit even for killing most animals. The United Nations Human Rights Office has voiced similar concerns, saying this could amount to torture or other cruel or degrading treatments or punishments under international human rights law. You know, I'm on the fence with the death penalty. If we could guarantee that we had the right person, maybe, but I'm not sure. Either way, this method sounds excruciating and unjust. I'm not in a position to say whether he deserved it or not. I just think that it should be quick and painless if we're going to have executions, and this doesn't appear like that's the way to go. Now, a quick little tidbit on the Israel-Gaza thing. So, as we know, South Africa has taken Israel to court, claiming that they're committing genocide and acts of war crimes. So, the International Court of Justice, their preliminary ruling has concluded that Israel is likely committing acts of genocide and war crimes. And they were ordered to do everything they could to prevent a genocide from happening. The courts couldn't really demand a ceasefire because I think they anticipated that Israel would just say, fuck you, and continue doing what they're doing. And the court really has no enforcement mechanism. So they just made this ruling, and it opens the door to further investigations. This ruling basically said, yeah, there's grounds to continue on with this investigation, so let's do this. And I think the U.S. should take that ruling and realize that maybe we're complicit, since we're funding basically this genocide, and maybe change course. So now we all know that there's a huge situation at the southern border. And Democrats have put out a bill that would increase funding. I went over it in a previous video. Increase funding, increase immigration judges, border patrol agents, money for technology, and more border wall or fencing, whatever you want to call it. And they've even come out with a new tactic saying that in this bill, Biden would have the ability to completely shut down the southern border if he deems it necessary. However, and it was working towards a bipartisan resolution. It was predicted to be going to be signed. But Trump decided that he wants to run on immigration. So he told his supporters in the Senate and the House to do nothing about it. So now it's kind of up in the air whether this immigration legislation will pass. It's the first comprehensive immigration legislation that has happened since the 80s. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. The whole system needs a whole new revamping. But politicians aren't willing to do that, primarily because that's kind of at least conservatives, like to run on border issues and claim that they're the only ones that can fix it. And Democrats are the ones that make open borders. And in a previous video, I went over the actual border policies and how they have not really changed from Trump to Biden, even though now more people are being deported under Biden than were ever deported under Trump. But that's not the story I'm trying to cover here. There is a convoy heading to the southern border to stop migrants from entering the U.S. The group is called Take Our Border Back. It now has more than 1,600 followers and is organizing on Telegram. I've not heard of it, but I'm not up on social media stuff. So one organizer described them as God's army and said, "This is a biblical, monumental moment that has been put together by God." Another said, "We are besieged on all sides by dark forces of evil." Pete Chambers, a lieutenant colonel organizing the group, has claimed he was a former Green Beret. Now, he said that the group would work with sympathetic members of law enforcement who he deemed as constitutionally sound. It's unclear how the group will actually confront the migrants and stop them from entering. But the fact that they're calling themselves God's army, I just want to point out a few verses out of the Bible. And I know everyone can cherry pick anything they want to suit their needs, but this is specifically about the least of us. And it says, Matthew 25:40, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did to me." Deuteronomy, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, 10:19, "You shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." Leviticus 19:34, "The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the aliens as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." Zechariah 7:9 and 10, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, render true judgment, show kindness and mercy to one another. Do not oppress the widow, the orphan, the alien, or the poor, and do not devise evil in your hearts against one another." So I went to catechism many, many years ago, had my first communion, have experimented with many, many different churches, but every teaching that I have ever been taught about Jesus and the Bible was to accept, forgive, be kind, help, and love. But it seems to me that also in my experience, the most ungodlike people are the ones who proclaim the most devout Christianity. And now there is a quote I want to end today with, and it's from Mahatma Gandhi, and I'm not sure, I read that maybe he didn't really say this. Either way, the quote itself is, I think, appropriate. And it says, "I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ." And that has been my personal experience, as well as my observations for Christians in these mega churches who are bashing the LGBTQ plus community, who are in support of ruining the lives of transgender people because they think they're ungodly. So they're actually living, in my opinion, the exact opposite of the teachings of Jesus. And I think they're just using the Bible to justify their hatred, because you can, like I said previously, you can cherry pick passages of the Bible to suit just about any need. Otherwise, they wouldn't be using the Bible for their pro-life stance, considering that in the Bible, abortion is okay and is actually deemed necessary in certain instances. So it's all just picking and choosing and using what could be a beautiful movement and religion to justify hatred and bigotry. That's all it is. So that's what I have for you today. If you like it, like, share, subscribe, vote. No matter how big, how small, how inconsequential, your vote matters, particularly in 2024. Don't sit this one out. And read everything you can get your hands on. Don't trust the media, politicians, because they'll spin it in a way that suits their needs. Go in and read the bills, go in and read the legislation, and find out for yourself. That's all. Thank you and have a great day. I'll see you next time.